Hey, TD Fitness family, this is Coach T. Welcome back to part 2 of my 3-part series on enabling and empowering you to reach even your most unbelievable fitness goals. You have the tools, and hopefully after last week's podcast, you have the mindset too. This week, I want to give you a way to approach the actions, the habits, the disciplines themselves. And I want to do this by continuing the story of my Ironman experience. Okay. As I said in the last episode, though, this isn't just a story of my Ironman experience. It's not a story about distance races. It's a story meant to highlight some of the fundamental things that are required to reach any goal, particularly if it's a stretch goal for you. That's something that you're not quite sure that you can achieve. Everything from walking a mile to running a 5K to exercising 3 times a week. It doesn't matter what level you're at. Stretch goals grow us beyond our present state. And these are the best types of goals because they really push us to grow. And that's what this episode is about. That's what this podcast is about. That's what TD Fitness is all about. It's about personal growth. So here we go. Now, when you set out to improve any aspect of your life, you really need to address 3 broad areas. And these are based on my research, my experience in working with others, and my own personal experiences. And those 3 areas are a growth mindset. That's what episode number 128 was about last week. The actions you take, those disciplines that you follow, or the habits that you practice. That's what this episode is about. And the perspective that you maintain through the ups and downs of your journey. And we'll talk about that in the next episode. So before jumping into the practices or the disciplines required to actually reach your goal, let me remind you of the personal example that I'm using to relay some of these principles. So in 2015, at the age of 40, I sought out to accomplish a goal that was really beyond imaginable and beyond scary for me. I wanted to complete a full Ironman race. And that's a 2.4 mile swim, 112 miles on the bicycle, and 26.2 miles of a marathon, right? It's a total of 140.6 miles in under the allotted time of 17 hours. Now, a little bit later in this episode, in this podcast, I'll get into why this was such a crazy goal for me, especially considering where I started from a fitness perspective. But needless to say, at the time that I decided on this as a possible goal, I had never done any fitness event longer than, maybe an hour or 2, right? So that's kind of where we are in this story. And as I said last week, something like this has to start with your mindset. But the next piece of the puzzle, and the one that most people think about almost immediately, is how will I actually do this? What am I actually going to do to reach my goals? How will I train? Where will I find the time? Can I even do it? And these are all very good questions. So let's jump in on the first of 3 principles that I'll highlight today. See, we don't often think to ask this question, but perhaps the most important things to ask ourselves at this stage of the game is this: is this a good time? And there's a lot to unpack here because on one hand, if you wait for the perfect time, then you'll never move beyond where you are. And then on the other hand, if you go headlong into striving toward your goal before you're ready, or when the environment around you isn't necessarily conducive to your progress and your success, you're setting yourself up for failure. So it's important to consider these things. So let's start with the question, am I ready for this challenge? This one is about you, okay? One of the hardest things for us to do sometimes is to be honest with ourselves, right? But this is a fundamental question when you set out to reach your stretch goal. I mean, are you ready? Are you bought in? Do you really believe in the end state that you're trying to reach? Or have you let someone else's goal or reality for you seep in? I've got years of experience as a personal trainer and even more years as a health coach. And the fundamental difference between a trainer and a coach is that as a trainer, I was more involved in setting goals for my clients. As a coach, however, I was more involved in helping them define and reach the goals that they set for themselves. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I decided to become a coach. It's one of the fundamental differences there. And when it came to my Ironman experience, I had to look myself in the mirror and say, it's now or never. I'm not getting any younger. This will not be easier if I wait until later and try to achieve or accomplish this goal. And at the same time, though I wasn't prepared to reach my goal immediately, I was ready to do the things that were required to ultimately reach that goal. At least I thought I was, right? I mean, I had the idea that I was ready. That involved 10 months of training. It involved early wake-ups, long weekend workouts, being uncomfortable, improving my diet. I had the mindset and the outlook required to attempt what I once thought would never be possible. I was ready to start and fairly certain that I could stay committed, and that was all I needed from a personal level. So the obvious question for you here is this: are you ready to start, and do you think you can stay committed? You don't have to be sure about that second part. In fact, I'm going to give you some techniques to help you stay committed and to make you more confident in the realm, in your commitment to your goal here in this episode. Now, the other thing to consider when it comes to deciding whether this is a good time to pursue your goal is what's going on around you. I mean, if reaching your goal involves doing things that will take a lot of your time, for example, then you have to be honest about how busy you are right now and how much extra bandwidth you truly have. What does your support system look like? Will you essentially feel like you're alone on an island working against everything and everyone around you? If so, then it's important to understand that. And if you can't do things to change it, then at least you're aware and you can do things to ensure success despite those challenges around you. Or you can wait until things and people around you are more conducive to your success, quite frankly. But you got to be careful here. It's easy to fall into the trap of using the lack of support in our environment or our surroundings or our busyness with other things in our lives as excuses to push off or delay our goals for improvement and for a better life. To push it off until later and to push it off until it's more convenient for us. And if you're making these decisions out of convenience, then I'll tell you that's the wrong reason. If you're making these decisions to avoid hardship and to maintain or continue following the easy road, then that's the wrong reason. Something to understand here is that you can't train to walk a mile without getting out and walking. It may be uncomfortable, but that's part of the deal. And you can't train for a marathon without putting in time to improve your cardiovascular capability. Again, that's part of the deal. So for me, I was actually in what was possibly the busiest time of my life up until that point. So my wife and I weren't newlyweds, but we had been married for about 7 years at that point. We had a 2-year-old, our first daughter. I was in a leadership position responsible for a demanding military mission and the health and welfare of a number of people and their families. And I was still working through TD Fitness to grow the business and provide more to my followers. It would have been easy for me to say, I'm too busy right now to attempt something like this. It would have been easy for me to say, I'll just wait until my daughter gets a little bit older and I'm in a less demanding job. But as I predicted or as I anticipated, those times actually never came. It didn't get easier. We had our second daughter a year later, and my next, quote, easier assignment later down the road was actually defined by an unforeseeable circumstance or event, which was my mother's deteriorating health problems and her ultimate passing and going on to be with God. So a lesson for me in all of that, and one that I try to pass on, is that the calm after the storm that we anticipate or hope for, it may not come when we think. Perhaps we're in the calm right now. As hard as that may be for you to believe right now, and we just need to adjust our way of thinking to doing more with what we're given and with the hand that we're dealt. So, does it seem like you're in a storm right now? I mean, how does this period compare to your past experiences, for example? What do you anticipate or hope the next period will be like? Perhaps you should make today the day that you decide to improve versus waiting for a, quote, better opportunity. So consider where you are, both personally and with respect to what's going on around you. Both aspects are important as you decide on your way forward in your growth journey. You know, this is an important concept, and it actually leads to the next fundamental principle in the practices and disciplines required to meet your goal. And that is making your plan of attack about you and not about the goal you're trying to achieve. That may sound crazy. So let me explain what I mean here. You know, as I looked at becoming an Ironman, what I saw were professional athletes on TV. They're very fast times. They're seemingly effortless races. They made it look easy. And I saw more, I'd say, regular people who had the Ironman tattoo or who were training for races, but they all seemed to be following the traditional approach of probably 8 to 14 hours of training per week. And I knew that I was neither the natural athlete that I saw those professionals as, nor was I even a regular athlete who could carve out that much time to train, okay? But rather, I was a moderately fit, full-time employed military member, husband, new father, who was trying to grow a small business. And I knew I wasn't willing to sacrifice my family or my career to meet this lofty goal of becoming an Ironman. But I also knew that I have a knack for planning. From my personal training experience, I knew how to set incremental fitness goals, how to develop plans that avoid burnout over time, and plans that gradually improve performance. And another strong suit of mine is being able to stick to disciplines that I set for myself. A lot of that comes from my training as a health coach, probably some of my military background, and putting into practice the very disciplines that I try to pass on to you through this podcast. So I started there. I started with my strengths. I created a plan that required minimal training time in the beginning and gradually stepped up the training each week to get to some rather long distances. I started my journey from where I was, not from where I wanted to be or where I saw others start their journey. I made steps toward my goal integrate into the life that I was living and the person that I already was. I didn't have to start exercising. I simply modified my workouts and made some of them a little bit longer in the beginning there. So I capitalized on the strengths that I did have versus trying to force my goal and change my weak areas. Let me say that again. I didn't try to battle my weaknesses. Instead, I leveraged my strengths. And all of us have strengths. The problem is we usually default to drastically changing our lifestyles to fit the change that we seek to make. Instead, I want you to think about making that change fit you. Again, we all have strengths. We all have different strengths. You have them. We need to use them. Okay? Now, the third principle that I'll offer here to you is to take action through consistent habits. If you're a repeat listener or follower of TD Fitness, you know that I talk about habits and consistency. I talk about them a lot. So why do I talk so much about this? Well, here's the deal. It all starts with habits. Just about everything we do, who we are, our state of health, habits are the building blocks If you have a habit of sitting down a lot and rarely moving around, then that affects your health and who you are. Similarly, if you have an active lifestyle, that also affects your health and who you are in a positive way. If you want to be healthier, that requires a lifestyle of healthier living, which requires behaviors that make up that lifestyle. And those behaviors are also actions that you take. And repeated actions are called, anyone? Habits. It's all about habits and being consistent with the actions that will get you to your goals. Now, when it comes to habits, I like to talk about them in terms of the three P's: plan, prioritize, and practice. So first, plan. Plan to do things that will actually have a positive effect on you meeting your goal. They'll help you meet or reach your goal. Or plan to do something that may not necessarily give you the most bang for your buck in progress toward your goal, but that will give you a mental or a psychological boost that in turn will add to your confidence and increase the likelihood that you'll continue to keep pressing forward. You know, you can go the route of taking steps to make the most positive headway towards your goal, or you can take a step that will improve your mindset and your confidence, right? Whichever way you decide to go, it's still important to plan. I created a plan to prepare myself to complete an Ironman in 10 months' time. I created a plan that accounted for my personal desires, my strengths, my weaknesses, and my time available. And I added the completion of a half Ironman as part of my training for the full Ironman so that I could build the confidence that I needed by reaching an intermediate goal along the way. Now, planning is not necessarily a strong suit for everyone. I get that. But you can enlist or hire help. And this is where maybe a personal trainer or a coach comes in. Professional athletes have personal coaches and trainers to create plans for them. So there's nothing wrong with you doing the same thing. Okay? If planning is not your strong suit, outsource it. Just be sure the plan accounts for who you are as an individual. Now, in addition to planning, you also need to prioritize. Oh, that's easy, you might think. Well, the truth is that it is somewhat easy to determine what's important, but prioritizing is more than just picking out the important things. My goal was to complete an Ironman, but time with my family, my duties and obligations at work, rest, all of those things are important as well. They're priorities as well. You know, in his book, Finish, John Acuff says that you need to determine what you will do and decide what you will bomb. What he's saying here is that everything can't be a priority. Yes, my family is of the utmost importance to me, but the decision to complete an Ironman had to be a family decision because they would have to sacrifice somewhat too. My work, while important, couldn't be a job in which I spent over 12 hours a day at. I needed to take some time to exercise and to rest. Now, this is a tricky one because we often don't have the required amount of flexibility in our jobs to necessarily dial that back, right? If you do, then that's an option. But if you don't, perhaps you'll have to plan around your work obligations. But this brings up another point too. You know, usually there's a lot more time available to us than we think. This is really one of the things that I learned through this experience, and that was to capitalize on the time that's in the margins. We go throughout our days, and there's more time, more downtime than we think. Now, some of that is needed. You can't go 100% all the time, but my point here is that usually there's more time available to us than we actually realize. You know, as the saying goes, you know, how did we spend all of our free time before we had kids? Right? Well, the truth is that you seemed just as busy before kids. You just spent your time on different things. I mean, that's what prioritization is all about. For new parents, the kid is the priority. The kid's needs trump your personal desires to watch TV or maybe to take a nap. And when we prioritize, we're saying what we're not going to do just as much as we're saying what we will do or what's important to us. And we tend to conflate things sometimes. And where we tend to conflate things is by feeling as though the things that you may not do right now are unimportant. But that's not the case. It's just that right now, during this period of time, I have a goal and my priorities have to temporarily be adjusted in order to meet that goal. So some things to consider as you think about what your priorities should be. In what area are you closest to meeting your goal? I mean, if you're already close to being able to walk a mile, for example, perhaps you set that as a goal to build your confidence or to reach your milestone quicker, and you use that momentum to propel you to even bigger goals. Or maybe you choose a goal that you can start right away, like today. I'm going to park farther away from the entrance to get in a few extra steps. Or one of my personal favorites, pick something that excites you. You want to exercise more, but you don't like running, let's say. Well, use your excitement as a pickleballer to make that bigger part, make it a bigger part of your exercise and fitness routine. Or you could choose to prioritize things that get you closest to your goal in a shorter amount of time. You want to walk or run a 5K, then prioritize walking and running. Everything's a trade-off. You see, usually between the amount of time you have and the amount of time and effort that's required to meet your goal. Or perhaps it's a trade-off between practicing things that you like to do versus doing things that you don't like to do. Whatever it may be, your priorities are an expression of the plan or approach that you landed on, and those priorities will guide your progress. So speaking of progress, our final P, you have a higher probability of success when you can be consistent with small steps and have some sort of accountability mechanism to keep you honest. And I think a great example of this is again, I go back to the plan that I developed for myself to reach my Ironman goal. My training plan allowed me to focus on consistency over time versus perfection all the time. There were 4 to 5 workouts each week, mostly short workouts of 30 minutes or less with a long workout on the weekend. I utilized high-intensity interval training to avoid boredom and to keep the workout short. I didn't plan to do something every day. I allowed for slack and some slop, quite frankly. I allowed for rest. The distances I was training toward, they increased just gradually each week, almost unnoticeable from week to week, but over time, it was a good progression. And the takeaway is that I planned to be imperfect. I knew that there were some workouts that I may miss. I knew that I wasn't going to work out every day. But over the 10-month period, I completed a majority of the workouts. It's not perfect, but it's consistent over time. And I built in slack. I took a complete week off every 4 weeks or so. And this allowed for some room to make up for missed workouts or to just rest my body, I also took small incremental steps. My goal to swim 2.4 miles started with me swimming for 5 minutes in my first workout. My goal to bike 112 miles started with a 5-mile bike ride for my first workout. My goal to run a marathon started with a 2-mile run. And I very gradually built on each of these over the course of several months. That way I knew that my goals from week to week were achievable because I was only attempting a little bit more than I had done in my previous workout. For me, my workout plan and being able to check off the boxes, if you will, of each workout, that was my accountability mechanism too. I could look back and see all that I had accomplished. I could look at my spreadsheet. I had a spreadsheet that, I checked the box literally every time that I completed a workout. I could see what I accomplished versus worrying what was to come. I also had a peer group to keep me accountable. Most of us followed that same plan too that I created. Sometimes we worked out together, but most of the time we didn't. But we always checked on one another to see how things were going. So whether you're the type of person who can hold yourself accountable with a tracking mechanism or some kind of log, or if you're someone who needs a peer group, it's important to identify what or who will serve to keep you accountable as you work toward your fitness goal. We all need something or someone to keep us on track. All right. So there you have it. Aside from a goal-oriented mindset, you also need to practice the disciplines that will actually get you closer to your goal. The 3 major takeaways from this episode here are: first, your consideration as to whether now is the right time to work toward your goals. Consider whether you're personally and mentally ready, and consider what's going on around you in your life. Second, make your goal about you. Leverage your inherent strengths. And then finally, practice consistent habits over time. They will absolutely get you closer to your goal. So that's it for this episode, TD Fitness family. Before I sign off, I'll ask that you help yourself, help others, and help me if you don't mind. Help yourself by downloading a short cheat sheet of the principles that I laid out here that you can use to practice these disciplines for achieving your goal, no matter what they may be. It contains the things that we talked about here today. You can find that at tdfitness.net/practice. That's tdfitness.net/practice. You can also find a link to it in the show notes for this episode at tdfitness.net/129. Next, help others by sharing this episode if you know someone who it can help. And then finally, I'd appreciate it if you help me by liking or commenting on this episode or post. I love your feedback, and I do use it to make what I provide to you better. So before you go, the thing I want you to remember this week, this is your takeaway for the week, is that consistent habits matter. Consistent habits matter. And with that, I'll sign off. Have a blessed one. Coach T, out.